The coffee cup trembled slightly in the old man's weathered hands as he set it down on the table. Colonel Bradley noticed it immediately. The subtle shake that came with age, the kind that made younger officers unconsciously step back when elderly veterans visited the base. "Look at those hands," the colonel whispered to his aide, not caring that his voice carried across the sniper training facility. "How's he supposed to hold a rifle steady when he can't even hold his coffee?" What happened at 3,000 meters would silence the colonel forever and remind everyone on that base why some legends never fade. Fort Benning's Advanced Marksmanship Center was buzzing with its usual morning activity. Elite snipers from across the military branches had gathered for the annual Long-Range Precision Challenge, a competition that would determine the military's best shooters. The range stretched out over rolling hills, with targets placed at distances that pushed both equipment and skill to their absolute limits. Into this world of precision optics, advanced ballistic computers, and cutting-edge rifle technology walked 73-year-old Thomas "Ghost" Patterson. He moved slowly, using a wooden cane to steady himself, and carried what looked like a vintage leather rifle case that had seen better decades. But what was truly shocking was what that old rifle case contained. Colonel Bradley, the base's commanding officer and a former Army Ranger, had been watching the old man's arrival with barely concealed irritation. He had received orders from higher command to accommodate the veteran's request to participate in the challenge, but he saw it as nothing more than a publicity stunt gone wrong. "Sergeant Mills," Bradley called to his range safety officer, "who authorized this civilian to be here?" "Sir, I have orders from General Morrison's office. Mr. Patterson is cleared to participate in today's challenge." Bradley shook his head. "Look at him, Mills. The man can barely walk without that cane. His hands shake when he's not even trying to aim. This is supposed to be a competition for elite military snipers, not a nursing home field trip." The younger snipers had noticed the old man too. Some watched with curious respect. They knew that older veterans sometimes had incredible stories. But others, particularly the newer graduates from sniper school, saw him as an oddity, a relic from a bygone era when warfare was simpler and technology was primitive. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a Marine sniper with multiple deployments and several competition victories, approached his teammate. "Check out Grandpa over there. Think he knows what kind of distances we're shooting today? Probably thinks 500 yards is long range," laughed Corporal Jackson. "Wait until he sees the 3,000-meter target. That's nearly 2 miles. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet." Because what Thomas Patterson was about to reveal would shock every sniper on that range. Thomas slowly made his way to the registration table, his cane tapping rhythmically on the concrete. The registration officer, a young lieutenant, looked up with professional courtesy, masking his confusion. "Sir, I think there might be some mistake. This is a military sniper competition. Are you perhaps looking for the Veterans Museum tour?" Thomas smiled patiently and handed over his paperwork. "Lieutenant, I'm Thomas Patterson. I believe I'm registered for today's challenge." The lieutenant scanned the documents, his eyebrows rising with each line he read. "Sir, it says here you're cleared for all stages of competition, including the 3,000-meter extreme long-range category." "That's correct, son." Colonel Bradley, who had been eavesdropping, stepped forward. "Mr. Patterson, with all due respect, I think there's been some confusion. The 3,000-meter shot requires incredibly steady hands, precise calculations, and years of training with the most advanced equipment. It's not really suitable for someone in your condition." Thomas looked down at his slightly trembling hands, then back up at the colonel. "I understand your concern, Colonel. These hands have seen better days. Exactly, Bradley said, thinking he had made his point diplomatically. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable observing from the viewing area. But this was exactly when everything changed. Because Thomas was about to show them something that would redefine their understanding of precision shooting. Thomas opened his old leather case. Inside, nestled in worn felt padding, lay a rifle that made several of the younger snipers do double takes. It wasn't the latest military sniper system with computerized ballistic calculators. It wasn't even a modern precision rifle with advanced optics. It was a Winchester Model 70 from the 1960s, with a scope that looked like it belonged in a museum. The wood stock was worn smooth by decades of handling, and the metal showed the patina of age and extensive use. "Jesus," whispered Sergeant Rodriguez. "Is that thing even safe to shoot?" Colonel Bradley's expression grew more skeptical. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to have to insist that our armorer inspect that weapon before you're cleared to fire." "Of course, Colonel." The base armorer, a master sergeant with 30 years of experience, carefully examined the rifle. His expression changed as he worked, from skepticism to curiosity to something approaching awe. "Sir," he called to Colonel Bradley, "this weapon is not only safe, it's been maintained to an incredible standard. The bore is pristine, the action is smooth as silk, and this scope has been individually calibrated and recalibrated. This is precision craftsmanship." Thomas nodded. "I've been working on that rifle for 50 years, Sergeant. She and I have an understanding. What you're seeing now is nothing, because what Thomas was about to demonstrate at 1,000 meters would be just the warm-up." The competition began with standard ranges: 800 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters. The young snipers with their high-tech equipment performed admirably. Their computerized systems calculating wind speed, humidity, temperature, and ballistic coefficients with digital precision. Thomas approached each stage methodically. He didn't use a spotting scope. He didn't consult ballistic apps on a tablet. He simply observed the wind patterns by watching the grass and trees, felt the temperature on his skin, and made his calculations using methods he'd learned half a century ago. At 800 meters, dead center bullseye. At 1,000 meters, dead center bullseye. At 1,500 meters, dead center bullseye. The younger snipers were starting to pay serious attention now. The casual dismissal was being replaced by professional interest. Colonel Bradley watched through binoculars, his skepticism wavering. How is he doing that with that ancient equipment? But the real test was coming. The 3,000-meter target, nearly 2 miles away, was where most competitors would struggle, even with the most advanced technology available. The truth was, Thomas Patterson hadn't told them the most important thing about his shooting background yet. As they moved to the 3,000-meter firing position, Thomas finally spoke about his past. Not to brag, but because the distance required explanation. "Colonel," he said quietly, "I should mention that I spent some time in Vietnam. I was attached to Special Operations units as a precision marksman." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez overheard. "Sir, what was your longest confirmed kill in Vietnam?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Son, that's not something you really talk about. But if you need to know for context, my record was 2,847 meters, with iron sights." The entire group went silent. Colonel Bradley felt his skepticism crumble. "Iron sights? That's impossible. It was 1969, Colonel. We didn't have the luxury of advanced optics. We had our rifles, our training, and our experience. And sometimes that was enough." Thomas approached the 3,000-meter firing line. The target was barely visible even through powerful spotting scopes, a tiny speck in the distance that represented the absolute limit of rifle precision. Actually, the colonel hadn't learned his biggest lesson yet, because what Thomas was about to do would completely change his understanding of what a marksman could accomplish. Thomas took his position behind his vintage rifle. His hands, those same hands that had trembled while holding coffee, became absolutely still the moment they touched the weapon. It was as if the rifle itself steadied him, as if 50 years of partnership between man and machine had created something greater than the sum of its parts. The wind was variable, gusting from different directions at different distances. The temperature was creating heat shimmer that distorted the target. These were conditions that would challenge even the most advanced shooting systems. Thomas didn't rush. He observed the wind patterns for 5 full minutes, watching how the grass moved at different distances, how the trees swayed, how the heat waves danced in the air. He was reading the environment like a book written in a language only he could understand. Then he made his adjustments, not with digital computers, but with old-school Kentucky windage and elevation corrections based on decades of experience. He settled behind his rifle, controlled his breathing, and prepared for the shot that would either vindicate his presence or confirm everyone's doubts. The rifle cracked once. For nearly 4 seconds, everyone waited in silence. At 3,000 meters, it took that long for the bullet to reach its target. Through the spotting scope, the range officer called out, "Impact! Dead center bullseye!" The silence was absolute, but Thomas wasn't finished teaching them yet. Colonel Bradley stared through his binoculars at the target, unable to believe what he was seeing. That's impossible. The ballistic calculations alone. Thomas slowly stood up from his firing position. "Colonel, those hands you were worried about? They've been shaking for 15 years, Parkinson's disease. But when I hold this rifle, when I become part of this system I've spent 50 years perfecting, the shaking stops. This rifle knows me, and I know it." He handed his weapon to Sergeant Rodriguez. "Son, try making that shot with my rifle." Rodriguez, despite being one of the military's elite snipers, couldn't even come close. The vintage equipment required a completely different skill set, one that couldn't be programmed into computers or learned from manuals. "Mr. Patterson," Rodriguez said with new respect, "how do you do it?" Thomas smiled. "Experience, son. 50 years of understanding that shooting isn't about the equipment. It's about becoming one with the weapon, reading the environment, and making calculations that no computer can make, because they require intuition, not just data." The colonel stepped forward, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "Mr. Patterson, I owe you an apology, and I think these young snipers could learn from you." But the most shocking part came when Thomas revealed his true identity. That evening, Colonel Bradley received a call from General Morrison, the same general who had ordered Thomas's participation in the competition. "Bradley," the general's voice was serious, "I need to tell you who you had on your range today." "Sir, Thomas Patterson. I looked him up after his performance. Vietnam veteran, impressive record." "You didn't look deep enough." Thomas Patterson is a legend in special operations circles. In Vietnam, he held the record for the longest confirmed kill in military history for over 30 years. He trained the first generation of modern military snipers. The shooting techniques your boys use today? Half of them were developed by Thomas Patterson. Colonel Bradley felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I almost didn't let him compete. I thought he was too old, His hands were too shaky. His hands shake because of Parkinson's, Bradley. But when he holds a rifle, muscle memory and 40 years of perfect technique take over. Thomas Patterson could outshoot men half his age on his worst day. The general continued. After Vietnam, he spent 20 years as a civilian contractor, training our best snipers and developing precision shooting programs. He's personally trained over 500 military snipers, including several who went on to break his records. Bradley was speechless. The reason I sent him to your competition, Colonel, was to remind your young hotshots that technology is a tool, but skill is irreplaceable. Apparently, he made his point. The next morning, Colonel Bradley found Thomas in the base dining facility, having coffee with several of the young snipers who had dismissed him the day before. They were hanging on his every word as he explained wind-reading techniques that weren't in any manual. Mr. Patterson, the colonel said as he approached, I owe you more than an apology. Thomas looked up with the same patient smile. No need, Colonel. I understand the reaction. But maybe next time, don't judge a shooter by the steadiness of his hands when he's not holding a rifle. Would you be willing to stay for a few days? I think our snipers could benefit from some real education. Thomas nodded. I'd be honored. For the next week, Thomas conducted informal classes for the base's snipers. He taught them techniques that predated computers, methods for reading environmental conditions that no algorithm could replicate, and most importantly, he taught them that the most advanced weapon in any sniper system wasn't the rifle or the scope. It was the mind and experience of the shooter. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez later said it was the most valuable week of training in his entire military career. And Colonel Bradley? He had a new policy implemented. Never underestimate a veteran, regardless of age or apparent physical condition, because sometimes the most dangerous weapons come in the most unassuming packages. Thomas Patterson continued to visit military bases for several more years, teaching and inspiring new generations of snipers. His 3,000-meter shot at Fort Benning became legendary, but more importantly, his lesson about respecting experience and understanding that true skill transcends technology became part of the culture. When Thomas finally passed away at age 79, his funeral was attended by over 300 military snipers from around the world, many of whom owed their lives to techniques he had taught them. His vintage Winchester Model 70 was donated to the Army Marksmanship Museum, where it sits with a simple plaque. The weapon is only as precise as the warrior who wields it. Thomas Ghost Patterson, 1950 to 2023. And at Fort Benning, they still tell the story of the old man with shaky hands who made the impossible shot, reminding every new generation of snipers that experience, skill, and respect should never be underestimated.